We begin with a look at the unsettling number of hate groups in Pennsylvania, including neo-Nazis, white supremacists, Holocaust deniers, and black separatists. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, 36 hate groups are active in Pennsylvania alone. The center says there are 21 in New Jersey, 3 in Delaware. Some of the groups have been linked to the Capitol riots in Washington. With me now is Chad Lassiter. He's the executive director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. The office enforces Pennsylvania civil rights laws, including bias and hate crimes. Thanks so much for being with us, Chad.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about that number, that 36 hate groups. Give us your perspective on that.
Not surprising when you look at this in context that a lot of things have changed from an economic dislocation perspective, where from an economy perspective, we've had the railroad industry, we've had steel, we've had mill towns and things of that nature. And now some of those industries are gone. And then also when we look at the cultural sameness, that oftentimes we think of Pennsylvania in an urban context, but in theory, it's more rural than anything. And so in some of those suburban enclaves and some of those rural enclaves, there are people who, not generalizing or stereotyping, have bought into the myth of white victimhood that they've been left behind.
But 36 seems like a lot when you compare it to New Jersey and Delaware.
Yeah, but if you compare it in close proximity to Ohio, it trends. I understand your point, but given the context of our democracy and the scapegoat hypothesis where there are some white individuals who are angry, who really believe in white victimhood, who are seeing the expressions of the investment of whiteness being exposed, there are individuals who are looking at individuals like the Jewish community, the African-American community, looking at faith communities, looking at the LGBT community, and they begin to trend with this scapegoat hypothesis, as well as the innate, embedded, deeply rooted anger of white supremacy.
And are some of them, I'm sure some of them are new, but in terms of the ones that we've come to know, sadly, and the older ones, like the Ku Klux Klan, is it that they've just been under the radar for so long, or is it truly that they are resurging?
Great question. I think it's both and. I think that they still operate under the guise of the shadow of hate. And I think that the outgoing president actually gave an opportunity for white supremacist groups, not just in Pennsylvania, but throughout the United States of America, to resurge. But I think we have to be careful not to buy into the historical notion of the Ku Klux Klan with the white hoods. Charlottesville taught us that those individuals who were spewing anti-Semitic remarks, targeting African Americans, LGBT, they look like they could be our doctors, our lawyers, our pediatricians. They look like they could be our college professors or even our pastors. And in fact, they were. And so we have the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan in Pennsylvania. We have active recruiting that has taken place in Carlisle, PA, in York, PA. Our organization, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we've been front and center where we had a no hate in the state town hall in York, PA, and the Grand Dragon of the Hershey KKK, he attended.
How'd that go?
Well, it was one of those things where he wanted to speak, and as the executive director and a person that just believes in seeing the humanity in all, even though they may be fraught with a form of white fragility, he wanted to speak, and I obliged. And much to the crowd's amazement, they were murmuring, and I said, we have to see his humanity as well. It wasn't really about First Amendment rights. It was really about, even in the midst of his white supremacist ideology and white supremacist identity, I really saw a human being, albeit all of the pillars of contradictions of the things that he said. But we were nervous. We were on edge. We actually had the mayor of York call for the police to come, and the police did show up.
So that leads me to my next question. How do we deal with these groups? You mentioned they're being monitored, but how do we curb what they could possibly do?
Well, I think one of the things that we have to fundamentally understand is that there is a shadow of hate, that there is white supremacy activity, and there is anti-Semitic activity and all types of forms of unlawful discrimination and hate with these groups. And so law enforcement works in conjunction with, on a federal level, as well as a national and local level, works with committed organizations and committed activists to really expose who they are. The other thing that is a phenomenon that we're starting to see trend is a paradigm shift, where there are ex-Ku Klux Klan members, there are ex Nazi fascist individuals who now are telling the story of why they joined. And so I don't have a answer for how we can, rid the democracy. But one of the things that we do recognize is that there's a introduction of more women joining these organizations in the modern era. But historically, they've always been there. There had been white women in the 1920s that made up a major chapter of the Ku Klux Klan in Lancaster, PA.
And why are we seeing it now?
Well, I think that it doesn't separate across gender. There are people who are mad on all sides of the color line and gender line. And we saw a lot of those women who were down in the state capitol on January 6th for that insurrection. And I think that once again, it goes back to all of these phenomena, the cultural sameness, that some people are racially socialized to believe that others should be treated in an inferior standpoint and that they should be in a superior perspective. I think that, the main thing that we want to get across to people is that when you see these things, reach out to local officials, reach out to local law enforcement. You can be afraid because we are in fact human. So we don't want anyone taking on the Ku Klux Klan, taking on white nationalists, taking on those in Pennsylvania who engage in forms of domestic terrorism. But there are agencies and organizations like the Attorney General's Office, the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, and countless others who are committed to doing this work in these protracted communities.
Another way that we have to see something, say something. Chad Dion Lassiter, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it.
As always, thanks for having me.